Chapter 15, Something New. Wanyanyekevu, being the last one to prepare his plate, sat down on his air mattress. As a Wakatilian, we pay attention to history and believe in our ancestry. Most of us believe in Sabaoth, for we believe that a tree without roots shall perish, just as a man who does not take heed of his past. Life has a funny way of recycling events in our life, when we don't pass them the first time around, just like taking any other test. You have to take the test repeatedly until you get it right. Louisiana, he said, pointing to Jonathan. It is prosperous but filled with hatred and lots of history. Not only that, many cultures come from it, such as the French, Spanish, European, Native American, and African slave descendants, as well as a combination of all of them. For example, mixing these cultures created people like the Cajuns and Creoles from the southern parts and descendants of Native Americans from the northern part. Some practice black magic, voodoo, and witchcraft, and some worship Sabaoth. You had the French who practice voodoo, some practice witchcraft, and some worship Sabaoth for each culture. It is the same scenario for each practice or belief. I can trace this back to when Louisiana became Louisiana and the trans-African slave trade began. The same history is true of those from the islands in the West Indies because of the trans-African slave trade, when words like mulatto and the Code Noir became famous. The brutality of slave owners and slaveholders, who raped men, women, and children alike, created these mulattoes. The cruelty of the slaves from Africa and the dark-skinned natives created children of white fathers and slave mothers, who were then classified as these mulattoes. It meant a person with white and black parents, but eventually it was used for any mixed-race people, period. Colorism, racism, and discrimination were the most effective weapons against us, but colorism pitted us against ourselves. Lighter-skinned slaves were treated more favorably than those with darker skin. It upholds the white standards of beauty and benefits white people in their institutions of oppression. We all know they assign slaves with lighter skin with domestic tasks, while they force slaves with darker skin to work outside in the fields, doing much more as well as harder work. The paper bag test was often used. If someone was the same color or lighter than a paper bag, they were accepted. If they were any darker than a paper bag, they were not. In New Orleans, the southeastern part of Louisiana, the Code Noir was used daily, which defined mulatto again as 1/2 white, half black, quadroon, 3/4 white, 1/4 black, octoroon, 7/8 white, 1/8 black. The Code Noir created colorism wherein the black community, dark-skinned men and women, preferred lighter-skinned blacks because they felt their children would have a higher social position, and light-skinned blacks made up the largest percentage of the free black population. Very few people know that some white women were indentured servants and had children with slaves and free African-descended men. Because of the mother's status, those children were born free and often married other free people of color. A large number of slaves in the United States during the 19th century were of mixed race, and with each generation, the number of mixed-race slaves doubled every 10 years. All the different cultures mixed with one another. Meanwhile, in places up north, like Utah, sexual relationships with a slave resulted in the slave automatically being freed. Wanyanyekevu paused for a minute. "Excuse me, I was trying to educate Jonathan about something he said a few months back, and I got sidetracked." Reaching into his bag, he grabbed an old torn book. "This is my Torah. It was once called the Bible back in the days, but it had fewer books than it has now. We should now have enough for everyone now. In it are the words and life of Sabaoth's children and Sabaoth himself." They all started reading from the Torah, and hours passed before they fell asleep. Jonathan was half asleep. "Hey, turn that light off!" he shouted to Joan. Joan replied, "You turn it off." "I turned it off before I went to bed." The light got brighter and brighter. Wanyanyekevu turned over. "Will someone please turn that light?" Staring straight into the sky, Wanyanyekevu saw a circular object with a large beam of light coming from its center and many smaller lights circling it, going right to left and then left to right. "Look up!" shouted Wanyanyekevu. Fear had consumed them all. Then a voice was heard by the entire group. Be not afraid, for he is a prophet of Sabaoth. There was no sound coming from the craft as it started lowering itself a few feet above the ground. Vapors from the craft slowly became a cloud. Jonathan and Joan grabbed their weapons, but Wanyanyekova held their weapons by the barrels. Did you not hear the voice of the messenger, the ancient Fariji? Jonathan was shaking. Hell, I'm afraid of that too. What the fuck is going on here? Wanyanyekova lowered their weapons toward the ground, saying, Don't be afraid of that voice either. I'm not sure if any Anakataas or Kompyutans have ever heard the messenger's voice, but neither one of us has ever seen this before. The cloud became thicker and thicker within seconds. A figure appeared 8 feet tall with grayish-white skin. Please don't be alarmed, for Sabaoth has sent me. Gesturing to them to sit. Please sit, the being said to them. I have come a long way just to speak to you all. He took off a golden chain with a black marble-like vial about half an inch long, made from an unknown substance from around his neck, and handed it to Wanyanyekova. This is for you and your descendants, a gift from Sabaoth. We call it San. Wanyanyekova took the necklace and placed it around his neck. No one can take it from you unless you give it to them. It shall protect you and those that choose Sabaoth. No man shall receive his San until they have been enlightened. Any man that try will regret it. The being's eyes flashed a few times vertically as it continued. My name is Z. I'm one of 4 species who have visited Earth many times and for many years, centuries even. We're called the Tall Whites. By looking at Jonathan as he handed him 2 smooth stones. Make sands with these. However, they will not be as powerful until you meet the one with the glow. Please have a seat. There is much to say. Jonathan stood there frozen with his mouth opened with what appeared to be a smile on Prophet Z's face. Prophet Z gently closed Jonathan's mouth. Jonathan tried to speak, but nothing came out. As the being continued, As I was saying, we are called the Tall Whites by your people centuries ago, and my species worship and serve Sabaoth as well. He reached into a device and grabbed a book, the Torah, handing it to Wanyanyekova. The language changed from Prophet Z's to English as Wanyanyekova flipped through the pages. You have many more books than we have, Prophet Z said. We're also older than any human. He smiled. I'd walked with Mshika when he was flesh. The being walked toward Daniel as he looked at Daniel and asked, May I? Gesturing to sit next to him, Daniel patted the bed twice. Sit here. Looking back up, Prophet Z continued. Please have a seat. Some continued to stand while the rest took a seat. Prophet Z said, There is much to talk about. It would be best to sit. They finally all sat down as Prophet Z continued. Many have refused to believe that anyone exists besides themselves. There are over 100 billion galaxies in the foreseen universe and 500 billion planets in the Milky Way alone, and they think they are alone on this small planet, may I add, tiny as it is. Just imagine an ant sitting on a table within your home. Humans are the ants, Earth is the table. Your universe would be the room in which the table seats. Therefore, what would be the other rooms? What would be the house next door and even greater outside the house, the atmosphere, or even space? That ant would be a fool to think he was the only ant. What about the other bugs that live outside of the ants? Foolish thinking for foolish people. Daniel, with a confused look. Say that again? Prophet Z looked down at Daniel. Think of it like this. A solar system is like a neighborhood. It's made up of planets, moons, asteroids, and other objects that are held together by the gravity of its star, usually a sun. A galaxy is like a city. It's made up of billions of stars and other objects, held together by gravity. The universe is like the entire world. It's made up of billions and billions of galaxies, stars, and other objects, held together by gravity. You live in one solar system, within a galaxy, within a universe. There are at least 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Each galaxy could contain anywhere from a few hundred to a few trillion stars. Which means there are trillions of solar systems in the universe. Pointing at Joan and Jonathan. They can explain it if you are still confused. After a brief pause, Prophet Z looked at their faces, knowing it was much for them to take in, but he continued. Some sometimes referred to our race as the third party. We are conscious beings that are telepathic, whose humanoid shape were born when it was written, "Let there be light," and it was light. So therefore, we are born millenniums before your species and in another galaxy. Other species have come to observe, some to conquer. We came to protect you from them and sometimes from yourself. Many came with ill will because Sabaoth chose your species over them. After all, they existed before you. Yet you fight among yourself for the silliest reasons. Your species is the chosen race, the most incredible creation of Sabaoth. We're smarter, use a significant percentage of our brains compared to humans, and therefore are more intelligent than you. You have been envied and hated by many of Sabaoth's creations before you. Your species is naive, for many even started worshipping our kind. Some governments, back then, would welcome them, and in return, they shared their technology with your kind, knowing many would become greedy and destroy the planet with it. And so it did, but the plans of Sabaoth cannot and will not be stopped. When righteousness is more, evil itself cannot be seen. Now sin is stronger among you, and righteousness is at its weakest. This is why your so-called Abenians have come to earth. The evil one or the great deceiver has stomped out the many lights of Sabaoth through lust, greed, and power. Pulling up a screen from a device he held. A live video feed of an Abenian many miles away in a jet ship. One Inyekova shouted, "That's hideous. They are a different kind of ugly." Jonathan and Jome had strange looks on their faces. Jome said, "I have never seen an ugly Abenians. Both males and females are all beautiful." Jonathan felt more like himself. "You got to be blind. What in the world do you see?" One Inyekova said, "That's not even human. I see a large hideous figure resembling human feces, with one enormous eye in the center and long eyelashes." Jonathan laughed. "How is it you don't see that beautiful creature?" "I'm with Jome. I have never seen an ugly Abenian." Prophecy showed them another one in the frozen region of northern Greenland. "What is it you see?" One Inyekova said. "A black panther-looking creature with scales instead of fur with a hideous smile on his face. His paws are actually very small hands?" Jonathan laughed. "That's a fine ass, Abenian female." Prophet Z turned to Jonathan and Jome. "What you see is what they know how they looked before they fell from grace, and one Inyekova sees them as they are, for these are the fallen angels of Sabaoth, what you refer to as demons. Until you all are enlightened, you will not see them for what they truly are." Remember when I said earlier that when righteousness is greater, evil itself cannot be seen. Now, evil is more, and very few serve righteousness. Therefore, the Abenians are here on earth. Well, before the Abenian, as you call them, came to earth, there were more righteous people, and their presence wasn't seen, but they were here in spirit and have been here since their fall, only possessing those who were truly evil. But the hearts of many have become cold. The preacher preaches prosperity instead of love. Technology led to laziness, greediness, perversion, and lust. As the evil grew on earth, the fallen angels of Sabaoth could then come in their original form before they fell from grace. Once spirits, now flesh, to deceive and pervert the words of Sabaoth to men. Showing them one last picture, "What do you see?" "Millions of Abenians," said Elijah. "Like when you stir up an ant bed." Elijah and Joy had said almost simultaneously, one Inyekova said. "Minions." Prophet Z smiled, looked at one Inyekovu and said, "This is the South Pole, and there are twice as many on the North Pole. The cold weather prevents you from going there, but lower-class demons are waiting to destroy the earth. Just waiting to be called." Daniel had fallen asleep on Prophet Z, so he carefully placed Daniel on the air mattress and covered him. Only those enlightened can see the Abenians for who they are, so for the next 3 months, you are to stay here and train. You all are Sabaoth's children, his warriors. He has chosen you all. Pointing at Ibrahim's children. Be not discouraged because you are not familiar with this world, for all that you know will come in handy later. A surprise awaits you once you get to Arizona. Know this, Sabaoth has found favor in your family. This family and Wanyanyekevu and these two brothers are with you, and you all will teach and learn from one another. Wanyanyekevu will help you see evil, see the Abenians as they truly are, through enlightenment. He turned to Jonathan and Joam. You two were chosen to do a work that has not been seen since the days of old. You shall open the eyes of your people, Sabaoth's people. For all of humanity belongs to Sabaoth. In days past, they divided black from white, male from female, a mother from father. But listen carefully. Separation causes division, and division causes war. Because of this, sons shall be against fathers, right against wrong, and nature against technology, which leads to destruction. Men look at silly things to judge one another, but Sabaoth searches the heart. Prophets he talked until dawn when he stood up. I must go now. He touched the sand around Wanyanyekevu's neck. I can rest now, for my promise has been kept, and now I shall see Sabaoth face to face. A thick cloud appeared, and it got thinner and thinner, and the spaceship hovered a few feet about them, and within a blink of an eye, it was gone. The backdraft from the craft woke Daniel, and they all stood there in awe, looking at the sand. What is that symbol? Asked Joam. I have no earthly idea. Wanyanyekevu smiled and pointed at Jonathan. Jonathan smiled. Corny as hell. And I don't know what to say. I know it wasn't a dream, for we all saw what just happened with our eyes. You know, I can honestly say since I've met you, there has never been a dull moment. They couldn't sleep after all the excitement, plus it was already dawn, so they pitched camp with the help of Jonathan, Elisha, and Wanyanyekevu. Using the equipment that the children of Abraham had brought, they created a training site. They talked all day about what had happened and what prophecy said that night, and soon afterward, they began reading the Torah. After building a 4D training room, a firing range, and a combat course, the day quickly ended. Wanyanyekevu was impressed with what Elisha and Jonathan could do with the different instruments and gadgets, and noticed how it made Jonathan glow while working on the various projects. Wanyanyekevu was curious and asked Elisha and Jonathan, "What is it that you both do, and how did you get to be so knowledgeable with all of this?" Elisha said, "Jonathan is a genius when it comes to technology, and I do my best to keep up." Jonathan said, "I was born with a special gift. I can build, create, and design anything that comes to mind. I'm able to look at something and figure out how it works and make it better with my own design. I guess it's a gift from Sabaoth." Wanyanyekevu said, "That's remarkable. I can't wait to see what you two will create for us in the next few months." They all smiled and looked to the sky. Wanyanyekevu couldn't help but think about Prophet Z's words. Only those enlightened can see the Abenians for who they are. Wanyanyekevu said, "Let's get some rest, for tomorrow will be a long day." As they said their goodnights and went to their tents, Wanyanyekevu grabbed his sand and said, "Sabaoth has chosen us, now it's up to us to choose him." With that, they all fell asleep. The three sisters, Grace, Mercy, and Joy, helped where they needed, and then they sat around reading the Torah as the men worked. A few hours before dusk, they all went fishing. "Tonight, we can eat hearty, but tomorrow we must perform the holy jeûne," Wanyanyekevu said. "What is jeûne?" said Elijah. Wanyanyekevu replied, "It's going without food or fasting as you consecrate yourself to the Lord by building up the spiritual man and lowering or resisting the physical man or your flesh." Flesh refers to your own physical or fleshy weaknesses and desires. Briefly, they discussed the jeûne and continued fishing. For the first time since they all met, they were having fun. Ibrahim's children had never been fishing other than playing virtual video games, and Elijah thought he knew what he was doing because he always beat Elisha in the game. They all stood along the bank except Jonathan and Elisha, who moved a few feet away, for they had created a boat with their equipment. Elijah boasted to Elisha, "If I catch more than you, you have to clean mine," Elisha said. "Okay, but if I get more than you have to clean mine as well." They agreed. Elijah threw in his line, and Elisha soon followed. Wanyanyekevu had his spear, picking fish left and right out of the water. Grace, Mercy, and Joy made a long chair and sat there with their poles in the water while they talked about what they had read from the Torah. "Got one!" shouted Elijah. He reeled it in slowly, just like he did in the game. It was a nice-sized fish, unlike the game, but he had a rude awakening when he took the fish off the hook. Everyone stood there, looking at Elijah and his catch. "Don't!" one Yaakov said, but before he could get it out, the fish slapped Elijah in the face, and Elijah and the fish both fell into the water. Everyone started laughing. Elijah, embarrassed, got up and fell to the ground by his sisters. "Well, I'm done with that." They laughed even harder. Daniel didn't enjoy fishing and saw an opportunity to have some fun jumping on Elijah's back. "Let's play." Afterward, they all gathered beans from the mesquite and palo verde tree and picked desert hackberry, jojoba nuts, and other edible plants around them. They finally closed out the day by preparing and eating dinner together. At 4 a.m., one Yaakov woke everyone up. "Now is the time to jeûne. For us to fight as one, we must be as one. No berries, no beans, and definitely no meat. You can drink water. But for long periods, you can drink apple juice for days or weeks, but water only during the holy jeûne. This week we shall jeûne for 4 days until noon. And every week after that, we will fast longer." One Yaakov turned to Daniel. "You must keep up, my friend, for I started my jeûne at an age much younger than you, so I know you can keep up with us." Then he turned to Jonathan, for he expected Jonathan to say something clever. But to his surprise, Jonathan had said nothing and had a sincere look on his face. He continued, "Let's form a circle." Everyone gathered themselves and formed a circle. "One half of my descendants are from the Tunica tribe, which originated from the Congo forest, and the other half from the Natchez and Choctaw tribes of America. The Tunica tribe mastered Kumjuka, which combines many African nations and Asian martial arts. Being Native American, I have also fused some Native American combat fighting techniques into it. And Sabaoth finished the rest with some techniques out of this world literally, and the entire style is called Poing de Dieu or Hands of God." One Yaakov started, stretching as everyone gathered around in a circle. "I must admit I need your help with this technology for weapons," he said while looking to see if anyone had questions. He continued, "Okay, we call this circle in the Zulu tongue an Umkumbi. The plural form is Iamaikumbi. However, in Native America, it represents or symbolizes the 4 directions. Think of it as a compass. It symbolizes what is needed during a conflict or what we use when challenging an attack." He pointed east. East represents balance, confidence, and creativity are all represented in this direction. In battle, this can be used to identify and locate an opponent. To do this, it is important to have strength, energy, and commitment. He then gestured towards the south. This direction stands for strength, focus, and success. Here, we use techniques to control our adversary with brave and aggressive behavior. Pointing to the north, he took a deep breath. This is the direction of courage, energy, and knowledge. In battle, this can be used to surprise or overpower our enemy before taking them down. Lastly, he pointed to the west. This direction is all about challenge, choice, and proof. Here, we use techniques to finish off our opponent before moving on to the next one. We must always keep in mind to carry out all of these techniques with respect and restraint. Remember this." One Yaakov shouted, "East!" as the group yelled back. Balance, confidence, and creativity. The East influences the identification or location of an adversary. By setting up and developing a solid attack position. Employed with energy, movement, and commitment. One Yaakov shouted, "South!" and the group called back. Represents strength, focus, and success. The South influences an opponent's brave, aggressive challenge. This technique effectively controls the adversary. One Yaakov shouted, "North!" the group called out. Represents courage, energy, and knowledge. The North influences the control of an opponent with surprise or overwhelming force before finally being taken down. And one Yaakov shouted, "West!" as the group called. The West represents challenge, choice, and proof. The West influences the takedown and finishing your opponent before moving on to the next adversary. Wanyanyekova shouted, and the group repeated after him. We execute all techniques in an environment of the highest respect and restraint. They repeated this over and over until everyone had it memorized. Wanyanyekova continued. Inside this circle, it is not a time for fun and games when we are in an umkumbi. It is to discuss serious matters, and it is when you come together to discuss your weaknesses before Jun, only if you want to. Your fasting is not to men nor for men, it's for yourself to surrender to Sabaoth. If you discuss a matter, it is for your help or to see if someone else has the same problems, so you can work on it together to defeat it. Most importantly, what is said here is to stay here, never, and I mean never, to be discussed with anyone. Not to a wife, a sister, or a brother. Now, we need Iasai Langa plural form Easy Langu, also from Zulu origins, a traditional large war shield approximately 4 feet long. It is an important part of our training, and I will show you why. Usually it is made from wood or animal hide, but that's not so good for this day and age, but… Elisha interrupted. Quartzite or boron nitride is the best compound used in today's technology. It's harder than diamonds and has high shock-resistant properties and other interesting qualities. Impressed, Wanyanyekova said. Can you make? Counting how many people were among them. 9? Elisha replied. No problem, me and Jonathan will work on it as soon as possible. Wanyanyekova nodded in agreement as he continued. Great, the ISI Langa needs to be as wide as its user, so you have to custom fit them for each individual. Jonathan said. No problem, will do. Wanyanyekova was thinking for a few seconds and then grabbed his cane, twisted it, and his spear came forward. This is an assegai. I need 8 of these. And Elisha smiled at Wanyanyekova. We can make that one even better, we need 9. Wanyanyekova replied. 9 it is. Okay, there are 2 more Zulu words we need to know for now. They are impi, the plural form easy mpi. Now, impi means battle formation. When you hear this word, it is essential to stop everything and prepare for battle. You will always be in defensive mode. He then shouted. Iwa! Looking at everyone's faces, he said. The last Zulu word you will need to know for now is Iwa. It means war or fight. This word is now not to be taken lightly or used lightly, for when you hear it, you are to fight at that moment. Not prepared, not get ready, but to fight. Think of it as a battle cry. Wanyanyekova shouted. Iwa! Everyone sprung up but didn't know what to do except Daniel, who stood there with his weapon drawn. I like that, Daniel, Wanyanyekova said. Taking his feet, Wanyanyekova showed Daniel how to stand and find his center of gravity. Elijah smiled. That's little Bruce Lee. He has watched all his films. Walking by everyone, Wanyanyekova illustrated the basic stance. Wanyanyekova shouted. Iwa! Correcting everyone's stance by barely pushing them. If you fall, when I push you, your stance is weak, Wanyanyekova said. Again, he shouted. Iwa! He continued until everyone's stance was correct. After a few hours of helping the group with terms and definitions, Wanyanyekova and the group read and discussed the Torah, before ending the Jun. At 4 a.m. sharp the following day, Wanyanyekova continued his teaching. As I told you yesterday, we use Jun to build up the spiritual man, but if you are not reading, meditating, or thinking about the Torah or Sabaoth, you are just going without food, and it's not a holy Jun. Jonathan and Elisha made notepads to help them keep up with their studies and handed out new weatherproof Torahs. As Wanyanyekova grabbed his new Torah, he wrapped his old one up. This has been in my family for a very long time. He started flipping through the pages. The Torah comprises all the spiritual books ever written by Sabaoth's prophets and scribes in days of old. Men's tradition separated each book, and war has always been the outcome. He held up the book. Because of this book. The Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Quran. He paused. Look to the back, the last book of the Torah. This is the Quran, a book of guidance. Its beginnings go back as far as the fall of the Roman Empire, at the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, the author. Wanyanyekevu continued flipping through the pages. Read about the Moors. No, as a matter of fact, read about everybody, everything, and every event. Try not to be ignorant of history, period. But back to Muhammad. When he was born, about 4 years after the death of Emperor Justinian, many Arabs were still worshipping the sun, stars, spirits, and idols. The Arabs possessed 360 idols, one for each day of the year. In his youth, he was never taught to read or write, being a shepherd boy. He eventually became a camel driver, traveling to remote and intriguing lands such as Persia, Syria, and Egypt, transacting business with merchants of every kind. Where he met Jews, Christians, and members of other sects, he interrogated them. The majority of Christians in the region were Monophysites, who were seen as heretics by the major Christian denominations of the time. As such, they were generally not accepted by the larger Christian community. Looking at Daniel and smiled, like most young men do, concerning their religions. He frequented the Jews and their rabbis, mostly because they were merchants and an omnipresent ethnic group. Since he could not read or write, he listened and was keen on everything the Jews related to him. Muhammad learned and extracted much from the Jewish religion and compounded it with Islam's new religion. It was just added to the Torah about a few centuries ago. Many fought against putting it in the Torah because it contradicts some of the other texts in other books. But an old prophet came forth and quoted Luke 9 verses 49 to 50 to them, which reads, "Master," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not one of us." And Shika said, "Do not stop him, for whoever is not against you is for you." Years later it was added. Everyone opened up their Torah and searched for the passage he had just quoted, as he continued, "Luke is an excellent book on discipline and respect for your brothers and sisters." "Now, where did we stop with our reading yesterday?" Mercy said. "We stopped at the beginning of 1 Kings. But it was so interesting that myself and my sisters continued reading while you all were fishing." Wanyanyekevu looked at Grace. "Do you want to recap what you have already read?" The group got into a deep discussion about what they had already read, and hours had passed before Wanyanyekevu said, "Well, let's continue reading the rest of 1 Kings." They all were so engulfed in the Torah that before they knew it, it was noon. Jonathan and Elisha set up their equipment and started working on different projects for Wanyanyekevu. The rest went hunting, and other small chores needed to be done before dusk. Throughout the day, Jonathan and Elisha called each individual to size them up for their ISI langu, and grabbing Wanyanyekevu's cane, they carefully redesigned it and other equipment and weapons. They passed out the ISI langu and assegai right before dinner. Everyone was excited to have their new weapons. Wanyanyekevu was off meditating when he was called to dinner, and his equipment was at his dining spot. "Done so soon?" He grabbed his cane. "I felt naked without my cane," Wanyanyekevu said. He played with it for a moment. "It's smoother and comes out much quicker than mine," striking it against the ground as hard as he could. "And much stronger." Picking up the ISI langu. "This is wonderful, I must admit." Wanyanyekevu left the dinner table before taking a bite and went off to test out some of his techniques with his new toys. Joan, Joy, Daniel, and Jonathan followed as the rest looked on and ate. The ISI langu is designed to form a total defense in mass formation against the throwing spears of the enemy. "In our case, those beams of light," Jonathan said. "They are highly concentrated beams of light or laser." Jonathan ran off, saying, "They should be finished." Wanyanyekevu continued, "Okay, laser, but the whole intention is to engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat and kill the enemy. Using the ISI langu and the assegai in combat is a unified action that allows you to hook the opponent's shield with the leading left outer edge of the assegai, pulling it backward, thus allowing the assegai to be smashed upwards into the right chest of the opponent. The effect is instant death. An ancient warrior named Shaka Zulu created this technique. Jonathan returned and handed out everyone a copy of Wanyanyekevu's cane. In tears, Wanyanyekevu couldn't say a word. He just smiled and hugged Jonathan. Wanyanyekevu just took his new cane and practiced with it as the rest joined in, and they practiced for a bit before returning to the dinner table, where they talked about the style and other techniques until they went to bed for the night. The next morning, without warning, Wanyanyekovu grabbed a wooden stick and shouted, "Impy!" Without prejudice, he went by each of them, striking them with the wooden stick. Joam and Jonathan could block his attack, but the rest were not so lucky. He shouted, "You must be ready at any given moment." They then ran miles around the lake and back. Non-stop they went through the obstacle course. The group was tired and weary, but Wanyanyekovu didn't let up. "Push yourself!" he shouted. Seeing the weary looks on their faces and thinking they wanted to give up, he gathered the group together. "I don't know why Sabaoth has called us together, but you have seen with your eyes and heard with your ears his power. Remember young David running from Saul. Can you imagine his pain? He had opportunities to stop running and hiding by killing Saul, but he didn't because Saul was God's servant. He knew that his jealousy consumed him. He knew Sabaoth would make a way. But we are not running from anyone but toward them, whoever it is, to do Sabaoth's bidding. It has only been 3 days, and you were chosen like David was to do his will. That alone should be an honor. Out of all the people on this planet, he chose us. We must be prepared to go to war by learning from one another. What I don't know, you should teach me. Now rest for the rest of today, but be prepared to go back at it in the morning." They talked among themselves and helped each other with whatever problems each other were having, and it made Wanyanyekovu proud to see them working together. The next day, they pushed each other. They all went to the firing range where Wanyanyekovu learned their weaponry, and he taught them many assegai techniques and how to make and throw different stars. They were on one accord. What was 9 individuals were now becoming one fierce force. Wanyanyekovu learned about the new technology, and he, too, had a difficult time understanding it. Days passed and those days turned into weeks, and they were able to fast for 3 days straight by the 5th week. By the 6th week, all of their frustrations and doubts turned into determination with the help of fasting and meditating, and the intense and rigorous training became somewhat more manageable.